Sure.
Well, hello, and welcome to April. This is April 2025, Immersed with Allison and Erica. So
There you go.
doing there now. Now you've been on too many times now for me. Yeah, I love it. I love it. So, well, we were like, how much time should we actually take up today? Because we have March was crazy important, and April is as well going to be so equally crazy important for the liquid and immersion cooling AI infrastructure of the data center of the future, right? Is that a good way?
Yep.
I mean, that's what I'm going to name it. I'm going to go back.
Yep.
Welcome again. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for inviting me again. I'm glad to be a regular on your
I love it. Yeah,
podcast.
I love it. It's so much easier than me just talking to myself, which I did for years, just talking to myself. But yeah, so we've had, the most epic time in, DCD, New York. It's already been a week and a half, and like our liquid nightcap event was such a huge success. We had 98 people there, cream of the crop of the liquid and immersion cooling world, right? But
Yep.
yeah,
Whole
I mean,
ecosystem.
we could give everybody a shout out, but I would be remiss in not mentioning that Professor Dre Giannifer, bless his heart, left his hotel room and just came just to say hello and hang out with us for about 30 minutes. So pinnacle.
Yep. Yep. He's the best. Yep. I love working with him. But yeah, so many others were there and so many to give shout outs to, but I'll let you go down
Yeah, no, let's
one
see.
can't
The
miss.
whole DCD staff hung out, right? That was
Yep.
awesome. George
Yep.
Rocket, and then they had a whole table. And then, of course, Daniel Rossi with Train, and of course, Jacqueline with Uptime Institute. And I'm gonna,
The
definitely leave
ladies.
somebody out. But
Do you have this picture of the ladies of liquid cooling that we kept
oh yeah,
overlooking Times Square?
yeah. And then you saw Carl in the background.
Yeah, and
Oh my
crawling. Yeah,
gosh.
yeah.
So much fun, so much fun. So we have, thank you to all of our sponsors. Oh, here, I know. So I turned everything off, like nine things, silence nine things. It's all good. Thanks again, all of our sponsors. We gave them a great shout out, and they know who they are, and you guys know who they are. And what was your biggest takeaway from DCD New York?
So my biggest takeaway, and what really amazes me, we've been to a lot of these conferences, and there's so many of them, it's hard to keep up. But this one, we hadn't been to one since last year, 2024. So a lot has happened, but every time I go to one, no matter how much time is between these conferences, I feel like I learned something new. And I guess the biggest take home message is the speed of AI changing and the speed of liquid cooling adoption is just astonishing. And you pick up nuggets at each one of these events. And one of the nuggets that I picked up, in addition to the fact that it was a year out from when we were last at DCD New York, and NVIDIA gave its big announcement about its Blackwell architecture, that it would only be liquid cooled, which I kind of call the turning point for liquid cooling. Well, a year later, the GTC NVIDIA conference had just ended, and we heard about the 600 kW racks. And so that was a huge focus of this. Nobody even thought liquid cooling was a thing a year ago, or was really happening. That was our job, was to convince the world that it was real and that it was not only happening and not just in a lab, but it was commercially deployable. A year later, you don't need to convince anybody anymore. It's just watching the pace of it was amazing. And this conference in particular, what I noticed was a whole new kind of players in the space realizing that they know a lot about liquid cooling and haven't been working on AI, but maybe that there's a place for them in this ecosystem. So I just noticed a lot of the people who have been, working in crypto for years and have been using liquid cooling probably before most anyone else are now seeing an opportunity in liquid cooling, and they were there and very, very visible at this conference.
Yeah. Well, the panel I was on, which was about, liquid cooling and next generation and AI, was a packed room, and I had so much positive feedback, and that topic came up, and then I noticed like there were so many vendors, they were bleeding out all the way into the hall and around,
Oh, it was packed.
oh yeah,
It was standing room only with layers. And so it was a huge room,
yeah,
standing room only. I actually took pictures of that, like
yeah.
with layers of people standing. Like the topic of liquid cooling is people are paying attention.
Yeah, and I got to meet some new, like the TTK players. I loved, what they're doing, the leak detection. So that was, like you said, they're starting to say, wait a minute, this is super amazing portion of these data centers, is which kind of what we know, the trajectory, air's not going away, blah, blah, blah. But to see things like that and some of the monitoring was amazing. Is really, really cool to see all the epic players. Of course, and our friends at Vertiv, had a great booth right there. And so,
Yep.
got to give Tammy Jo a shout out. So anyway, I love it. But I think I'm going to have FOMO. You're going to go to Data Center World in DC. I'm not going to be there. And now I'm really salty and upset because Mr. Wonderful is going to be there. I blame him, right, for the fact that I'm going to miss out. But yeah, no, that looks to be really amazing, right in your backyard, right in the Liquid Cooling Coalition's backyard, basically. So you'll have to give me the down low.
Yeah, no, it'll, I'm used to being a partner with you now in these events. So it'll be one where we won't be together, but we can't be at all of them. So and I think you're going to be the representative at con. So I'll have FOMO then, but
Oh,
but
okay.
the best is that I feel like we've developed an incredible
Yeah,
partnership
yeah.
and a team in working on a common goal of moving along this liquid cooling transition. And so yeah, I will. Don't worry. I will certainly fill you in on all that I learn about next week.
I love that. Well, the thing we were like, oh, okay, we're going to talk about this, this, and this. And then today, the OCP
Oh
AI
yeah.
ML physical infrastructure workshop happened, right? And I had registered for it, and I thought, oh, this sounds really interesting. And I know OCP puts on really great webinars. This one was a wowza, right?
It was. I think it had 100 and was
I thought
50
like
or was
180 at
200.
one
No,
point.
actually,
Yeah.
I had close to 200 on it. You're right.
Yeah.
200 participants, and it was a 4 to 5 hours, right?
Yeah.
It was, and up until the end, it was filled.
Yeah, it was totally. And we're talking, Intel, Nvidia, and Microsoft, and oh gosh, I'm going to leave somebody important out. They were all these very core end users and chip manufacturers talking, and
Meta, AMD, yeah.
oh my
Supermicro,
goodness.
yeah, everyone was there.
One of the things that I wish I could give him a shout out for saying it, and it was pretty early on. I think it was when the first hour, and he said, this is questions. He said, okay, I have a serious question. When does infrastructure start? When does
Oh,
infrastructure
right.
end and IT begin? Or when does infrastructure begin and IT end? And he said, because this is scary. And I was like, whoa. And then somebody else like quoted him a little bit later on and said that really resonated with me, because I think that 2023, when ARPA E came in and they did the funding for 19 different collaborations of IT meets infrastructure, how are we going to cool this? And, it was really interesting to hear about it back then. You're like, oh, good, they're going to do some money, but, and give some money to this. I don't think we realized how pivotal as well that was going to be. So to see them talking today about 10 kW per server, like it was just nothing. And I'm like getting my calculator out. I'm like, okay, 10 kW per server for 2U server times a 48, U rack. That's 200 kW per rack right there.
Yeah.
So,
So we heard a lot today, right? We heard a lot. And I mean, this is a story that, and it's closely linked to liquid cooling. And it's why I think in a lot of our discussions, you hear pieces of this, but today you heard it from so many people at once,
Mhm.
is that this is a serious infrastructure change. And it's not, so liquid cooling is just a part of the story, right? You need it to cool the chips. But not only that, we heard that the rack sizes need to change,
Yeah.
and that the power that's going into the servers and into the racks need to change. And that you can, and you and I have been talking about this for a while. I know Jacqueline from Uptime Institute talks about a lot, about how you can't separate IT from the buildings anymore. And in the old days, you used to build a building and you had data center developers build buildings, and then you had IT people go bring in their equipment. Well, today the message was, everybody who's in the space has gotten the message. You can't do that anymore. You have to design the entire data center around the IT. So it's a new game, and every part of it needs to change, and the amount of power that needs to go. And this is for AI, of course, but AI isn't getting less. I think you and I are aware of that. And for AI compute, the amount of power that it requires is going to be, a significant challenge, not only coming into the data center, but then into the racks. And with racks at these levels, the power for the data centers, like, are they, let alone the buildings themselves, it's going to be a massive challenge.
Yeah, for somebody to break it down for me at 10 kW per server, when, I've been in this, long time, 30 years, and, for so many years, 8 to 10 kW per rack, that's like a big bang moment. And I also think when you were talking about, infrastructure meets IT and all this, I was like, it's a kumbaya moment for the IT and the infrastructure to come together. Yeah. How are we going to build this? How are we going to cool this? But how are we going to do it more sustainable and with a look to the future? That was another one of the closing things right before I had to log on off for this. I think it was Steve with OCP said, you certainly don't want to be in the room where you're building a next generation data center and you haven't built it for the next generation. So you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a whole lot, which is why that gentleman, again, I wish I could give him a shout out. He said, this is scary.
Well, yeah, it's no question, it's a serious challenge. And I do want to mention, when we talked about before, that so the liquid cooling coalition itself is evolving, right? Because everything is changing so quickly. So the team that I work for and actually runs a bunch of coalitions, and we've been finding that the coalitions that we're running, because some of them work on power and some of them are focused. One of them focuses on methane capture in gas, and another one was working on climate and using digital to address climate issues. And we're realizing that all of these different areas that we're working on now are, with AI, circled around the data center. And so, because it really is this infrastructure ecosystem wide issue, we are now moving the LCC into a kind of superstructure that is going to coordinate all of our different coalitions, called the AI Infrastructure Coalition. So we are ourselves evolving as the space is changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
And so we'll have a lot to talk about that moving forward as well.
Yeah, I love that. Well, honestly, my husband is a news watcher. He watches,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's like almost every morning when I'm having my coffee and up on the news is talking about data center AI, data center AI. And that's really, I'm like, and of course I automatically perk up, I'm like, did you hear that? So interesting how DC is now really with the
Waking up.
yeah, and with the
Yeah,
liquid.
no, today there's a hearing. So yeah, today there's a hearing on the Hill on AI infrastructure and energy. It's AI and energy. And I know that Eric Schmidt and also I think Scale AI and Micron and the Columbia Energy Policy Group that are all speaking about this or are testifying about this very challenge that we're talking about today. So it's front and center topic. It's a front and center topic in DC. And there's a hearing almost every week, at least one now that's relating somehow to AI.
Yeah. Well, more for us to talk about next time. How's that? And as this evolves, I love it. I know Intel Innovate was last week. I know the Shell team was there. I got to give a big shout out to my big Shell sign. I know I was telling Erica, she was like, that's a big sign. I was like, I love vintage. So it's actually an antique vintage sign. But so much amazing things going to be announced from last week, and I don't want to take the thunder, so I'm going to be quiet about it. But you and I are getting ready. Let's see, to the future besides DCD, no, sorry, DCW in DC. Right. It's a lot of acronyms there, right? Gonna miss it. Can't wait to hear your thoughts on that. But also Dublin, the OCP Dublin EMEA summit coming up in a couple weeks. I think I was looking like we live in 18 days or something like that for Ireland. I'm so excited. I've never been. But I'm also very excited about your panel that I am the moderator for yourself and Rolf Brink and Kelly Mullick. And you talk to me a little bit about you wrote this is your baby, so I want you to talk about. I have the questions, I have the hard work because I'm joking, I have the easy job. I get to just ask questions
because we got to answer the questions.
No, Erica. No, anyway, go ahead.
But actually it ties right into everything we've just been talking about, and the title of the panel is Scaling AI Infrastructure with Liquid Cooling. And so it's tying all this together, like how liquid cooling is really an enabling technology for AI, and that there's going to be a technical panel talking about liquid cooling right before ours. So we're going to be moving a bunch of these liquid cooling panels together. So we'll come off the technical discussions, and then we're going to delve into how the policies that we need to create in order to help support the transition, because it's important that organizations like OCP come up with the new best practice standards and identify the barriers and the research needs that are necessary to overcome, the challenges that need to be overcome in order to make this transition successful, because we know it's happening. So our collective goal here is to make sure it's successful and that it gets used for good and not evil, which is definitely a concern. And so our role is to try to help with that transition from the policy side. So we'll be getting into questions that focus on that.
Yeah, I love it. And then we have our Liquid Pub and Pour event Tuesday night as well. And so we have amazing sponsors, 12 sponsors. I'll be sharing that later on next week. Just a big shout out to our sponsors. But that is going to be amazing. Just authentic Irish food and just collaborating and sharing and having, all the people that are devoting and being volunteers. We're trying to literally give them just a little nudge of appreciation in this huge ecosystem. And by feeding them and giving them drink and listening to some live Irish music, I'm so excited about it. And so huge shout out to our sponsors for that too.
And a huge shout out to you for all the effort that's been into organizing this. And I'm just going to say, while these networking events sound like a lot of fun, because they also have become an incredible draw for real networking and people in the space getting to know each other and finding partners, because this is another lesson we've learned over the last year is this is no longer a time where you can be super successful in the data center world by doing things on your own. It's become a requirement that you have partnerships and that you work across the ecosystem to figure out how to get through these challenges of designing the entire infrastructure around the IT.
Yeah, which is why I've always said I just love OCP so much. And even before I became community outreach and part of the steering committee, even when I was just a work stream lead, and even when I was just listening in on calls for the first, 2.5 years, I don't think I even spoke on a call. I really just love that whole collaborative aspect of checking egos at the door and helping to, legitimately say, hey, if this is going to evolve in this direction, we need to start dissecting, and it takes a village. It takes a village. And so, yeah, no, I love it. Well, all right, we will put a pin in it because you and I could just continue to talk for another 20 minutes. I know us. And then but I will be seeing you in a couple weeks. And then if anybody wants to, meet you out at Data Center World in DC and talk about the amazing things the Liquid Cooling Coalition does, they'll just connect with you on LinkedIn. Is that the best way to do it?
Yeah, that, or you can come to our website,
Oh,
www.lccoalition.com. But yeah, LinkedIn is a great way to reach
I
out.
love it. And also, I wanted to thank OCP for supporting these
Yes.
amazing events that we now have been able to do. Dublin and, of course, Data Center Dynamics New York, our first two. We'll have two more at the end of the year. We'll talk about those later, too. So, anyway,
Yeah,
all
there's
right.
so much to
Well,
talk about, but the LCC OCP partnership, I could not, it's just been amazing. So yes, thank you.
I love it. All right. We'll
All
talk soon.
right.
And thank you
More
guys for
soon.
joining us. Until the next time.
All right. Bye.
I was like saying, like, until the next time, be cool. No. That was kind of corny, I know, but that's all right. That's my MO.
Are we still being recorded?
Yes, we are.
Okay.